In the space of a single night, Iran did something no analyst in Washington, London, or Riyadh believed Tehran would actually dare to attempt. Not one strike against a nervous neighbor, not two countries drawn unwillingly into someone else's war. 4 sovereign nations, hit almost simultaneously in a coordinated wave of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones that lit up air defense radars from the shores of the Persian Gulf all the way to the deserts of Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan. 4 countries that had fired not a single shot in this war, suddenly living through the opening minutes of one. This is the story of the night the entire Gulf stopped sleeping at once, and the story of why Iran's gamble may end up costing the regime far more than anything it could hope to gain from it. It began after a second consecutive night of American airstrikes tore into targets deep inside Iranian territory. Tehran's leadership, reeling, humiliated, and increasingly cornered, needed to answer. But answering the United States directly meant answering the most powerful military machine on the planet, a machine that had just demonstrated it could strike Iranian soil twice in 48 hours without losing a single aircraft. Iran's generals understood exactly what a direct confrontation with American air power would cost them, so they reached for a different playbook entirely. Not Washington, not even Israel, the country that started this entire chain of escalation months earlier. They reached for the small, wealthy, heavily garrisoned Gulf states that host American bases on their own soil, nations whose only true offense was geography and alliance. In the strategic mind of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, striking Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Jordan became a way to hit America without technically hitting America at all. It was a message wrapped inside someone else's flag, fired from Iranian soil into the heart of 4 countries that never asked to be part of this fight. The first alarms came from Kuwait. They came fast. In the earliest hours before dawn, Kuwaiti air defense crews watched their screens fill with a swarm of inbound threats. A mixture the military would later confirm as 3 ballistic missiles, 1 cruise missile, and 10 drones, all converging on a single Patriot missile battery tied directly to the American military footprint inside the country. Understand what that target actually represents. A Patriot system is not just expensive hardware. It is the literal shield standing between incoming Iranian steel and everything living underneath it. A piece of infrastructure so strategically vital that an attack on it is functionally an attack on the entire concept of American extended deterrence in the region. Kuwaiti crews scrambled into action, engaged every inbound track, and when the smoke finally cleared, they had intercepted the entire barrage. Every missile, every drone, not a single warhead reached its intended target. But interception, no matter how successful, is never free. Falling debris rained down across multiple locations throughout the country, causing material damage on the ground, and 1 civilian was struck by shrapnel and wounded, now receiving medical treatment, their condition reported as stable. That single injured person, standing in the wrong place at the wrong moment near a battery they had no say in hosting, is the human cost hiding underneath every clean military statistic you're about to hear tonight. While Kuwait's skies were still tracing the smoke trails of successful intercepts, Bahrain's sirens began to wail. Air raid alarms tore through the pre-dawn stillness as Iranian drones and missiles streamed toward American-linked fuel storage sites, the very logistical backbone keeping U.S. naval and air assets fueled and combat-ready throughout the region. This was not random targeting. Bahrain hosts the headquarters of the United States Fifth Fleet, the single most important naval command post in the entire Persian Gulf, the force responsible for keeping shipping lanes open and Iranian naval harassment in check. Bahrain's armed forces moved with speed and precision, describing the assault in blunt, unambiguous terms, stating they had intercepted and destroyed several treacherous Iranian aerial attacks before they could inflict serious damage. No casualties were confirmed on Bahraini soil, but the intent behind the strike could not have been clearer. Iran was not aiming for empty desert or symbolic gestures. It was aiming directly at the fuel, the logistics, and the naval command infrastructure that keeps the American military machine operational in these waters. Then came Qatar, and this is where the entire story takes a strange and revealing turn, because Qatar is not just another Gulf state sitting on the sidelines of this conflict. For months, Qatar has served as the primary mediator, the trusted go-between, shuttling messages back and forth between Washington and Tehran, the host nation for direct diplomatic channels, desperately trying to keep this war from spiraling into something the region could never fully recover from. Iran struck it anyway. State media in Tehran claimed its forces had targeted an early warning satellite antenna site, a piece of infrastructure that effectively functions as America's eyes in the sky across this entire stretch of the Gulf, feeding real-time tracking data that Patriot batteries in neighboring countries depend on to function. Qatari authorities issued an immediate public security alert, raising the security level and urging residents across the country to remain indoors. They stopped short of confirming that any missile or drone actually struck its target, and within hours the alert had been lifted entirely. But by then, the message had already been sent, whether the warheads connected or not. Even the peacemaker, the one country actively trying to end this war through diplomacy rather than force, was not considered off limits. And then Jordan, farther from the immediate Gulf theater, farther from the front lines of this conflict than any of the other three, a country that should have been the very last one anyone expected to see targeted. But in what Iran's own military described as the second phase of its retaliation, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps statement confirmed it had launched 10 ballistic missiles directly at Jordan's Al-Azraq air base, a facility with direct ties to American military operations in the region. Jordanian air defense crews scrambled and intercepted 8 of the 10 inbound missiles. Sirens wailed across multiple Jordanian cities as the country's entire military apparatus snapped to full alert, its air defense network performing exactly the function it was built and trained for. No casualties were confirmed. No significant property damage was reported. But the psychological threshold had already been crossed, and it could never be uncrossed. Jordan, a kingdom that has spent years carefully, deliberately staying out of every regional firestorm erupting around its borders, from Syria to Gaza to Iraq, was suddenly and unmistakably standing inside one. 4 countries, one single night, one unified strategic intent behind all of it. And that intent was not subtle. Iran's own military statement described this coordinated assault as a continuation of ongoing operations against American bases throughout the region. And the Revolutionary Guard issued an explicit warning that any further American military action would trigger additional strikes on American-linked facilities across the entire Gulf. This was not the work of a rogue commander acting outside the chain of command. This was not a tragic miscalculation or an accident of war. This was doctrine, decided at the highest levels of Iranian military leadership. Tehran had made the calculated, deliberate decision that if it could not strike America directly without inviting total annihilation of what remains of its conventional military, it would strike everything and everyone America touches instead, regardless of how many innocent bystanders got caught in the blast radius of that decision. But here is where the story pivots. Because while Tehran's state media apparatus was busy broadcasting images of defiance and strength to its own domestic population, back home the true price of this war was already grinding the country down. Iranian state sources confirmed that at least 14 people had been killed and dozens more wounded inside Iran itself over that same 48-hour window, as American strikes tore through targets stretched along the country's entire southern coastline, hitting Bushehr, home to Iran's primary nuclear power facility, along with Chabahar, Bandar Abbas, and Sirik. Explosions rocked port cities and coastal towns that had never once seen the machinery of war reach their own doorstep before this conflict began. Iran even suspended its own national train service between Tehran and Mashhad after American strikes damaged the railway line during the elaborate, nationally significant funeral procession for the country's slain supreme leader. A single detail that tells you everything you need to understand about how deep, how personal, and how destabilizing this war has already become for the regime's own sense of internal legitimacy and control. So Iran now finds itself trapped inside a brutal, self-reinforcing equation, one with no clean exit in sight. Every missile launched outward at Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Jordan is one less missile available to defend Iran's own increasingly battered coastline, where American strikes continue landing with devastating precision and near total impunity. Every dollar spent manufacturing and launching these weapons is a dollar the regime cannot spend propping up an economy already buckling under the combined weight of international sanctions and the direct costs of sustained warfare. And every neighboring country struck, none of which fired a single shot at Iran first, becomes one more government with a permanent, undeniable generational reason to align even more closely and more publicly with Washington. Tehran's leadership may genuinely believe it is projecting strength across the region. What it is actually doing, strike by strike, is manufacturing its own long-term isolation in real time, with the entire world watching it happen. Because the reaction across the region arrived almost immediately, and it arrived remarkably united. Saudi Arabia condemned the attacks outright, calling publicly for restraint and a return to serious diplomacy, while simultaneously renewing its explicit support for its neighbors under fire. The United Arab Emirates went even further in its language, describing the strikes as a flagrant violation of sovereignty and a direct, active threat to regional security and stability, reaffirming full and complete solidarity with Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan in the same breath. Egypt condemned the attacks as a serious and dangerous escalation directly threatening civilian safety across the wider region. Even Qatar itself, the country still trying hardest of all to keep a diplomatic channel breathing between Washington and Tehran, publicly denounced Iran's strikes against itself and its neighbors as a blatant violation of international law, while its foreign ministry took the additional and telling step of insisting that none of the military bases inside Qatari territory had ever been used to launch any attacks against Iran in the first place. Sit with that detail for a moment. Iran struck a country, and that country's own government had to issue a public clarification explaining it had done nothing whatsoever to provoke the strike, that is not the posture of a nation righteously punishing an aggressor. That is the unmistakable posture of a wounded regime lashing out at whichever targets happen to be standing closest when the order finally comes down.